Welcome to the Wing Space podcast, a place to take up space, a space for you to settle in, sit back, relax, and focus a little bit on health, wellness, faith, family, and this crazy thing called life.
This podcast is not a replacement for mental health treatment or professional health care. In case of crisis or emergency, please contact your local healthcare provider or dial 911.
Hey there, and welcome to the Wing Space podcast, a place to take up space. I am excited to have a guest with me today, Les Wells, who is our marketing director here at Hope and Healing. So glad to have you with us today, Les.
Me too. So glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we are going to be diving into a conversation today about social media boundaries. If you've been following along with us this month of October, you may have taken a peek at our most recent blog about boundaries kind of in general. And we've had some podcast discussion about that. And we know that social media is a place where we really have to set some boundaries. And so, yeah, let's dive into that. You spend a lot of time on our own social media as our marketing director. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are about this topic for our listeners. We know that social media does and has most recently gotten a lot of criticism. And that, of course, is not without plenty of reason and research. But before we dive into some of the potential detriments of social media, what would you say are some of the benefits of socials?
Sure. I don't think we'd have the conversation about boundaries if there weren't a reason to be on social media in the first place, or if it weren't giving us some form of value. So I highlighted 4 main benefits from my perspective, and I think that they vary from person to person. If you're using social media as a workspace, or if you're using it as a creator versus a consumer, I think these can sort of take on a different hierarchy for each person. But I think all of the benefits can fall under one of these 4 umbrellas. And the first one, I think, is the connection piece. So the social part of social media. And, you know, sometimes if you're like me, maybe you live far away from your family and friends. Maybe you even live far away from your workplace. So you use social media to stay connected with key people in your life, key people maybe from different chapters of your life that maybe are not front and center for you anymore. Maybe people that you used to work with and see every single day, but now you've lost that constant contact. So I think it's a great way to stay connected with one another. And also, because we are busier than ever, it gives us an opportunity to share news and receive news without having 100 conversations of the same nature, because sometimes we just don't have the time or the energy to do that. So we can kind of buckshot, if you will, whatever's going on with us. We can also be informed about the people in our lives in the same way and stay connected. The second benefit that I see most prevalent for me is the media part of social media. So entertainment, news, and really all of the same reasons that we watch TV can be maybe applied to be reasons that we find ourselves browsing on social media. And the thing about social media that is a little more advanced, I guess you could say, than just flipping on Netflix or turning on your television is that the social media algorithms know what we like, and they know what we want to watch, and they know what we're likely to engage in. So it's kind of like your own personal network that you can tune into any time of day in the palm of your hand, which, as we'll get into shortly, is a blessing and a curse. So that's the second thing, is the entertainment piece. I think the third benefit, and another major one for me, is the space to be creative. And in the past, you know, if you're looking at a creative, whether it's a musician or an artist, we'll just take a musician, for example. If they want to get noticed or share their work, then they need to hit open mic nights and travel and record a demo and sell CDs out of the trunk or whatever they have to do. It's a lot of time and energy and money investment to get yourself and your artwork out into the public eye. And now people who are creative in all sorts of different ways are able to spend a lot less time investing in those types of activities and a lot more time focused on their craft, because sharing it with the public is so much more accessible. So that's a gift to many people. And creating on social media is kind of a craft in and of its own now. So that's become its own sort of art form in the past 10 years or so, or maybe even longer. And so that's a way for people to express themselves. So then the last benefit from my perspective is that social media is a marketplace. And there's a lot of transaction going on in social media, in the world of social media, which kind of piggybacks somewhat on the last benefit, because many people have figured out how to take advantage of this extremely powerful marketing tool, because not only is it something that most of us have access to in the palm of our hands, but by and largely it's free to use. So for small business owners like us at Hope and Healing, this is a big deal because we can compete in the marketplace with businesses that maybe have more resources to put towards marketing than we do, but we can still kind of level the playing field a little bit with how many people are exposed to our services, our offerings, just using social media and online resources. So those are, to me, the 4 major benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, our community can probably see all of these things in the work that we do here at Hope and Healing, in terms of connecting and providing a little bit of entertainment, providing some news and information. Certainly almost 2 years ago when we brought you on staff, we were trying really hard to be creative in and of ourselves, and we were doing the very best we could. But your art came out in that way, and certainly being able to market into our community, I can certainly see all of those benefits for us. When we're talking more from a personal use of social media, not a business use today. So what might be some things that our listeners might consider avoiding when it comes to utilizing social media?
Yes. So there are a few things that can really get us hung up in social media world that sort of, in some cases, can override those benefits or make those benefits not as beneficial as they could be if we were to avoid a few things. I've got 3 outlined. And again, I think that most of the other gripes that people have with social media can fall under one of these 3 categories. So the first one that I have is what you might hear referred to as doom scrolling, or spending copious amounts of time on a social media app without even realizing that you're toiling away the minutes and hours of your day. So it can be an alarming waste of time, being shocked to find, oh my gosh, 30 minutes have gone by, or even maybe 2 hours have gone by, and I don't even know what happened to those 2 hours. It can really take us off guard just how quickly the time can go by, especially now that a lot of the content we consume is so bite-sized. It comes in these little 30-second or 90-second clips. So we're not just watching a TV show or 2 episodes of The Office or whatever it is. We're watching zillions of these little clips, and we don't even realize how quickly the time can just zoom right by us. But in addition to wasting that time, or maybe spending that time in a way that we wished we'd spent doing something else, we're susceptible to over-consuming and being super stimulated by all this information that we're taking in, and not really knowing what to do with it, or not knowing how to sort through it. So what I like to look at when I look at my consumption of social media, I like to look at it the same way I would look at consuming cake. And the reason is because there is nothing inherently wrong with cake. Cake is great, but it's up to me to moderate my cake consumption. And the way that I do that will drastically affect whether or not it's a positive experience, or in some cases, a really unhealthy experience. So asking myself, Was my social media consumption today a bite of my day? Was it a slice of my day? Did I eat a whole cake's worth of social media today? Am I eating a whole cake's worth of social media every day? And noticing those patterns, and when we compare it to cake, we can kind of see how not only is this, it could be detrimental for our mental health, but our physical health too, because if we're scrolling on social media, we're not outside in the sun. We're not taking the walk. We're not playing with the dog. We're not doing the workout or whatever it is. So that's one little tip that I have for sort of reducing the doom scrolling pattern for myself. And also to set a timer on certain social media platforms. So on my phone, and I think there's probably the option to do this on whatever kind of device you use, but there's an option to set time limits on apps. So for Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, I think those three specifically, I have 1 hour timers set daily. So that's collective. And if I spend all 60 of those minutes on Instagram, then Facebook and WhatsApp are also, those timers go up too. And you can set it for whatever you want. But what it really helps with is the awareness. So it gives you that alert. You've spent an hour on social media already today. And for me, I know that at least Monday through Friday, I also have to work on social, like I have to use that platform to get content posted for Hope and Healing and do whatever else needs to be done on those platforms. So really, I have maybe 15 to 20 minutes before I see that timer go up. And I know, okay, an hour of my day, which to me is a bite, has already gone by. So if I'm going to extend this time, at least I have the awareness of where I am with my social media cake for the day.
Yeah, I love the idea of having those timers set. And I know my children do not like the timers that have been set on them before, but I use them. I'm also at an hour for social media. And when it pops up and says you're a few minutes away, 5 minutes away from an hour, it's a good reminder for me to say, okay, it's been an hour. Maybe it's a collective hour over the whole day. Maybe it's an hour in one sitting, but regardless, it's awareness. And you touched on two things that I think are so important that I want our listeners to hear. One is about this idea of consumption, because our brain cells are these little sponges that collect everything that we consume. And if we're, constantly looking at, silly, funny videos, okay, great. We're filling our brain cells with silly, funny, we're laughing, we're having a good time. But most people are probably not spending all of their social media time looking at funny videos. They're looking at, I think we'll probably get into this, but they're looking at other people's things and they're comparing, which then means lots of negative thoughts are filling their brain cells. They're, looking at news outlets. So we know there's lots of terrible things that are happening in our country and in our world. So we're filling ourselves with all of that information, and lots of opinions of other people that aren't always positive. So what we consume is kind of what we become. And I don't have the exact statistic on this, but I read a statistic recently that it kind of talked about this idea that right now we have probably thousands of touch points of information throughout the course of the day. Maybe it's even more than that. And if you think about, if I think about 30 years ago, the news came on once in the morning and once in the evening. And then maybe if you were awake late enough, you could see the 10 or 11 o'clock news. You had to go to the library or pick up the newspaper to get other content. Now it's at our fingertips and we're just filling our brain with such information, good or bad or negative, indifferent, it doesn't matter. But then what does our brains have not gotten bigger. Our brains do not have more capacity, but we're putting so much information in there. And then what do we do with it?
Exactly. It can be really crippling. And I think overwhelming for people to subconsciously consume all that information and not have anywhere for it to go or an immediate use for that knowledge. It's just there now, taking up space.
Right. And our teenagers often get the negative ramifications of this, but I think it's true for all of us, is that we also have lost, for some of us, we've lost the capacity to be bored. We've lost the capacity to just be. We don't sit on the back porch and just listen to the birds singing. We sit on the back porch and we scroll through Facebook or Instagram. We don't sit and talk to a friend. We're on our phones showing each other things that we've probably already seen on each other's socials. And so we're losing that capacity to just be, because our brains are constantly going, and then they need to be constantly going. So then we're constantly going to fill that need. And can be a really vicious cycle.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good point. And the other point that you brought up, which you were correct in assuming that we would get to, is the second thing that I had on my list of things to avoid, which is that comparison component of social media, or the tendency to compare on social media, and the preoccupation with vanity metrics, I should say, which are things like likes on a post or comments, shares, views, all of these numbers that you see. And if you're seeing the content of a creator that you don't know personally, or you don't follow, they're not in your network, it's likely because there's tons of engagement on that post, tons of these vanity metrics. And the algorithm has told you that this is something that you want to see based on all of the other things that you look at. So you end up seeing content from someone maybe you don't even know, have no real life connection with, or even internet connection with, but we end up seeing their content anyway. And I think that this preoccupation with vanity metrics can be detrimental for creators. I think it can stifle creativity. But if you're someone who strictly consumes on social media, maybe you don't actually post anything very often, but you use it to keep up with other people, to see what's going on, to fill your time, then I think those vanity metrics can still be a little bit detrimental if we don't have a healthy perception of them. Because especially like with our demographic of listeners and clients at Hope and Healing, we have a lot of parents, and there's a ton of content out there for mom life, dad life, this, that, and the other. And, if we're to believe that the mom who cuts the crusts off of the sandwiches in perfect star shapes every single day, if we're to believe that that's the bar or the standard or the expectation, we're going to be left feeling like we're not doing an adequate job when we see, oh, well, this post has 700,000 likes on it. They must be doing something right. What can I be doing differently? Would I be a better mom if I cut the sandwiches into stars? And we have to really step back and ask ourselves, what are we looking at here? Are we looking at something that is going to make a difference in my child's safety, well-being, overall health? Or are we looking at something that is aesthetically pleasing, that was created to generate those vanity metrics in the first place? So it all really comes back to our perception of those metrics, if we have a healthy relationship with them, and then also recognizing if we're not, and letting that be okay. If there's content that you've seen over and over and it keeps popping up again, and for one reason or another, it triggers you, I think it's perfectly fine to say, I don't like seeing this, and I'm going to set a boundary between myself and this content. And it doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter if it's because it reminds you that you still haven't started going to the gym when you said you were going to 2 months ago. Tangibly, what can we do to sort of set those barriers? The Instagram app does have the option for you to hide those vanity metrics. So if you don't want to see how many likes or comments are posted on any piece of content, you can go into your settings and you can tick off the toggle that says hide. And the other thing I would say to do to sort of help cut back on that comparison between yourself and the content creators or people that you know through the internet is to really ask yourself, why you are connected to that person on social media in the first place. Because sometimes I think we become connected with someone on social media because we feel like we have to be. And my sister is like the poster child for not being this person. She's very good at, keeping her accounts in her online communities very reflective of her real life community. And I always try to be like her when I'm making decisions about, do I really want to follow this person, or do they just live 2 doors down from me and I feel like I have to like their Facebook post, Or on the other hand, does this person's content make me laugh? Do I learn things from them? Do they inspire me? Do they make me feel good when I look at their content? And I think once you have the understanding of the impact that someone's content and consuming that has on you, you can make a decision about if you want to maintain that connection or not. Do you want to unfollow that person or mute that person on social media? Because there are options that you can take advantage of if you're worried about hurting their feelings or something like that, that they don't have to, it doesn't have to be their business if you're in their business or not.
Absolutely. And I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago from I believe she was a nutritionist that was speaking, and she was talking about how she does not think that we should, she doesn't think that cookbooks are a good idea because it sets an unrealistic expectation for what your food is going to look like. And we often decide what something's going to taste like based on what it looks like. Mm-hmm. And while you were talking, I had that same kind of idea come into my mind that social media, well, let me go back. Cookbooks are created by professional chefs and by food artists and photographers, which means the food that they're putting out on that tablescape or for that picture is most likely doctored in some way that it is not consumable. It looks very good, but it's not necessarily the food they're going to sit down and eat. The same thing is true when we look at things on social media, because that picture of a hearth with the beautiful fall scape around the fire was just posed for the picture and likely taken down because it's too much and there's a little child that's toddling around the house, and the mom, who's the social media influencer, doesn't want the child to, fall, hurt themselves, mess it up, whatever. And they've just presented it on social media because they are a paid influencer or trying to be a paid influencer. And so I love the discussion about following the people that we know, because I know that when my friend posts a picture of a pizza that they made homemade, it looks delicious, even though it might not look, cookbook worthy, because they really did just make it with their kids. They didn't just, pose it for the sake of a picture. And so recognizing who are the influencers, who are the people that I am following that are just putting that content out there for me to see it. And it's maybe not the bar that I'm supposed to reach for.
That's right. And the word influencer is so interesting anymore because at one point or another, it meant, like you said, you're getting paid to recommend some sort of lifestyle. And at the end of the day, there are those paid influencers that pop up in our feed all the time, but all of us, regardless of how many people we have on our list of followers or how many people engage with the content we're creating and publishing, we all have the capacity to be influential. So we might not think that anything is wrong with posting our perfectly curated cake that we made for our son's birthday or whatever it is. And there's not. It's the consumer's responsibility, though, to make sure that we are keeping in mind that there's only so many characters in the caption box that we can fill up. There's only so many slides in the carousel that we can put images. There's only so many seconds on the reel. And everything else, you're not seeing. You're not seeing that little kid who's going to yank the extension cord out of the hearth decorations. You're not seeing all of that. Mm-hmm. And that is, part of my third point too, that doing a really good job of foreseeing in your commentary that yeah, everything does need to be taken with a grain of salt. So that third point was about, we can, like we said, post perfectly well-intentioned things online and consume perfectly well-intentioned things online and still have a problem with that for one reason or another. So when unsavory things are being published online, or things that are meant to harm or bully or troll, that's kind of the word that people use for internet bullying, is trolling. When we encounter that kind of content on social media, how we consume that and engage or not engage with it can also, I think, impact our mental health tremendously. Because of course, none of our listeners would ever perpetuate that kind of behavior. But I think that being exposed to it in and of itself can be harmful because of a few things. I think it can desensitize us, number one, to the wild ways in which people choose to interact with one another when they're not face to face with another person, when they're sitting in the comfort of their home as anonymously as they choose to be. And, when we see enough of that happen, whether it's in a virtual space or not, I think we become desensitized to it and don't maybe give it the attention that it deserves as unacceptable behavior and behavior that can really cause harm to people's mental health and well-being. And then the other harmful thing about it that you touched on at various points in our conversation is that we'll see a couple letters in front of or behind someone's name and decide that that makes what they're sharing credible before we'll actually go dive and do the research on any information that we find online, because the rapid pace at which social media moves has also sort of demanded that we speed up how we take in this information. So if we're getting the information at 1,000,000 miles an hour, we're also choosing whether to buy into it or not at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And that, I think, can be a little bit dangerous when it comes to our perceptions of reality and our critical thinking skills. Because, there's this saying, and I'll get it wrong, and I don't know who said it originally, but maybe I can put it in the show notes if I look it up. And it says something like, we're drowning in information, but we're starving for knowledge. And I think that really sums up just what kind of information pool we're dealing with on social media, because you've got information coming at you really quickly and frequently. But when it comes to knowledge and what we believe in and what we have evidence of, we're being influenced a lot from external places that sometimes are less savory than others. So to combat that, in addition to monitoring the amount of time you're spending, your consumption, who you're engaging with, or consuming content by, I would say just what you said is to take everything you see on social media with a grain of salt. Because even if it's something as innocent and wholesome as the pumpkin patch trip that your neighbor took with the kids, there's things you're not seeing. You're not seeing the argument on the way to the pumpkin patch with the spouse and the kids in the back seat. You're not seeing the spilled pumpkin spice latte all over the place. You're not seeing all of those other things. You're seeing what someone wants to share with you. And I think that that's just fine, as long as we know as the consumer what to do with that and what it does and doesn't mean about us.
Yeah, you were talking about that pumpkin patch trip, and it made me think of, we had our family pictures taken last weekend, and I've heard a long time ago that behind every family picture is a mother that's losing her mind and screaming at everyone to smile. And that, that's pretty much, two teenage boys, it was like, come on guys, just stop. And then they smile and they have this great picture. And we have to remember that the reality of what's happening in our lives is parallel to the reality that's happening in other people's lives. But like you said, there's not enough captions to tell the whole story. So we just kind of share the good stuff instead of the not so good stuff, or just the reality, the mundane.
Right.
Yeah. And, we've talked a little bit about the algorithms of social media, and I don't know that I'm like an expert at this, but I really pay attention to my gut. And if I scroll and my instant reaction is like, ugh, or something that's negative, I just go on, on either, I use Facebook and Instagram. So either one of those, I'll just go up to the little X and I'll hide it. I'll snooze it. I'll unfollow it. I'll whatever. Because if we just keep scrolling, the algorithm thinks we saw it and that we like it. So then we're going to see it more, or that same similar content. So I would really reinforce what you said. Just don't be afraid to unfollow. Don't be afraid to snooze. Don't be afraid to say, no, I don't like this sponsored content. Because if you're having those constant negative gut reactions, you're eventually going to spend an hour of your time and you're going to walk away feeling blah and negative because you've just filled yourself with things that are just creating that response within your body. So we've talked about some benefits of social media. We've talked about some things to avoid with social media. What might be the wrap up for our listeners today?
I would just invite anyone who's listened to this and maybe resonated with different pieces of it to have an assessment of your own about your relationship with social media. Looking at the time you spend on there as time spent eating cake. I think that is a really simple way to get started. And also, looking at your screen time overall and kind of asking yourself how you feel about that number. You don't have to look at it and say, okay, next week I'm going to cut this down by half. Or, if you've got 6 hours of screen time and you are uncomfortable with that, you don't have to go right into setting a goal to minimizing it. But I think even just noticing this is too much time that I'm spending here. I'd rather spend it somewhere else. And then maybe see if you can work in an hour that you are outside, spending 30 of those minutes for a walk and 30 of those minutes on the porch reading a book, or like you said, just sitting there doing nothing, listening to the birds. So instead of making that intention to stay off of social media, maybe shifting the intention to doing something else to fill that time, and then seeing what's actually left over for social media. And, asking yourself the questions, why am I engaged with these accounts? Is it because they are filling my bucket? Or do I feel like after I'm through with their content, there's less in my bucket? And just gauging that for yourself. And the beautiful thing about it is you don't have to share it with anyone. It can be personal. You have more control over your social media platforms and the content you consume than you might think. And taking that control can really help you to enjoy the benefits of social media without having to deal with all of these things that can lead to the criticism that social media ends up getting quite a bit of.
Yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. Yeah. So we hope that you guys listening today have learned a little bit about social media and maybe are feeling empowered to assess your own relationship with social media and continue to receive the benefits of social media without being impacted by the negative things that can come as a result of that. So feel free to engage in that process for yourself and to set some boundaries for your own healthy relationship with social media. Feel free to share this podcast with your friends if you think that it would be helpful for them. If you have any kind of information that you want to share or additional conversation you want to have, feel free to send us a DM, or you can email me, Jennifer@hopehealingtherapy.com. And thanks for listening. Hope you have a great day.